anxiety about the unknown.
I could hear the steps.
He had all
walking up
black
the
eyes.
stairs.
There was no
All of a sudden, this
light in
huge
his eyes.
object with lights was on
And
top
it
of
made
us.
no sound.
The fear. Yes, this happened.
About a week after my Aunt Connie's death, the entire family was still reeling and feeling the effects of the shock. My grandmother came to me in a dream, and she only said 3 words: "She can't breathe."
Hi, and welcome to Yes, This Happened, the only podcast featuring authentic accounts of paranormal events, as told by the individuals who experienced them. Our guest today is Jerry, who will share with us a personal story involving the loss of a loved one, precognitive dreams, and a mystery to uncover.
I come from a small town called Laredo, Texas. It's on the border between Mexico and Texas. I come from a very large extended family. My mother is the oldest of 9 kids. There were 5 boys and 4 girls in her family. And they all grew up, got married, had kids. So I grew up surrounded by cousins. Every family event was at least 30, 40 people. Kids running around, uncles outside, doing cookouts. All my aunts were in the kitchen, talking, gossiping. It's a great upbringing. My grandmother, the matriarch of this family, the family said that she had what they called second sight. Ever since she was a kid, she had the ability, so the family says, to speak to family members that had already passed on, to sometimes even predict the future. There was all kinds of stories growing up about my grandmother when she was a kid, when she was young, about how she would tell people what was going to happen. There's one famous story about when she was a kid where she warned a family member not to go to work that day. The family member listened and stayed home, and that day there was a big explosion at the factory where he worked. There's also other stories about where she would communicate with some of the family members that had passed on.
As a child, Jerry's grandmother had a premonition that ultimately saved her uncle's life. Throughout her life, she demonstrated a range of extraordinary abilities, including precognition, which makes her well known and respected in her community. Even after her passing, these abilities will continue to manifest themselves.
As an old woman, how I knew her, people from the neighborhood would come to the house to seek guidance, to speak to loved ones, to get any kind of advice that she could give them. I was always skeptical, but I figured if it makes them feel good, what's the harm? Did I believe in it? Did I think it was actually true? Possibly not, but I also didn't see any harm. But the people that would come talk to her were pretty loyal because she seemed to be guiding them in the right direction. Like, I'm not just talking about, hey, my husband died, can we talk to him and see what he's doing or saying? It was specific things like, my husband died, I can't find the life insurance policy, and she would lead them to where it was. Out of all my aunts and uncles, by far, my grandmother's favorite was her youngest, my Aunt Connie. Everybody loved Aunt Connie. All the cousins loved Aunt Connie because, as happens a lot with big families, she was our aunt, but she was only like 8 years older than we were because she was the youngest out of a big group of kids. So she was the young aunt, she was the fun aunt, she was the cool aunt, She was the aunt that was always joking around with us. She was closer to our age, and we all adored her. We all loved her very much. But Aunt Connie had a problem. Aunt Connie was born with a defective heart. She had some sort of heart disease that would limit her physically. Every time that we were out swimming in the pool, Aunt Connie couldn't swim because she didn't want to agitate her condition. When we were outside running around on Easter, trying to find the Easter eggs, my Aunt Connie would sit there and just watch us because she was very limited physically. And she had had a couple of episodes where during the night, her heart would stop beating or get an irregular heartbeat, and she would wake up in a panic, feeling like she was having a heart attack. And they would rush her off to the ER, and then they would settle her down with medication or whatever, and then they would send her home. But the doctors had always said that nighttime was the most dangerous time for Aunt Connie because of her condition. Because that's when the body was at rest and the heart was being left pretty much on its own. And that was the most dangerous time for her.
Grandma and Aunt Connie are both highly significant figures in Jerry's life. Unfortunately, Aunt Connie has a condition that could potentially be life-threatening at any time. However, this is not the only issue she faces.
Yes, this happened.
Jerry comes from a tight-knit family where grandma is a central figure. In many Latino families, the grandmother holds a special place of importance. Jerry's Aunt Connie is also greatly loved and admired by her nephews and the entire family. But despite being affected by a respiratory condition that could be fatal at any moment, there is another issue that the family is aware of as well.
Aunt Connie, when she turned 24, she married a man. I won't call him my uncle because no one in the family really considered him as our uncle. He was not a nice man. He was very aggressive. He was a bit of an alcoholic. He also abused drugs. He was not very nice to Aunt Connie or to the rest of the family. I still remember family parties that we would have, and everybody would be participating. And if he went, because sometimes he wouldn't even go to these family parties, Aunt Connie would show up alone. But if he happened to go to one of these parties, he would be off on his own, just drinking beer, not really socializing or participating with the rest of the family. I would hear my aunts and uncles talking about Aunt Connie from time to time, and they would always say the same thing. You know, as long as they didn't see any bruises on her, or as long as they didn't see that he was abusing her physically in any way, they weren't going to interfere. She chose him to be her husband. That was her choice. She was an adult, and they had to respect that. And if she didn't want to be there anymore, then she could divorce him. But as long as he wasn't being aggressive with her, that they weren't going to interfere. No one liked him. Everyone thought he was a bit of an idiot. No one liked him, but they just left it at that. A few years later, my grandmother passed away. Devastating event for the entire family. However, soon thereafter, a couple of my aunts and my uncles that were her children started saying that my grandmother was appearing to them in dreams and giving them advice. My uncle Paul told a story one time when he was considering a job offer. He had been with this company for years and years and years, and he had gotten an offer to go to another company that was offering him more money, but it was a new company. And he was torn whether to leave a stable, established company for the newer company for more money. And this was something that he talked about openly to the family, trying to get advice, and nobody knew what to tell him. Well, according to my Uncle Paul, my grandmother came to him in a dream and told him to stay put. Sure enough, he stayed in the company where he was working. Sure enough, he stayed in the company where he had been working for years. And 6 months later, the other company that had been offering him the job went bankrupt. A lot of my aunts and uncles kept talking about how my grandmother would appear to them. I remained a skeptic. A couple of years later, what we feared the most happened. My Aunt Connie died in her sleep.
Although the possibility of Aunt Connie's death was always present in their minds due to her condition, her passing comes as a shock to the entire family and sets off a series of paranormal events in Jerry's life that reveal a significant secret.
This was back in the early 80s, and medical technology was not what it is today. So her death was attributed to her heart disease, and everybody left it at that. There was no investigation, there was no autopsy. Everyone knew the condition that she had, her doctor knew it, everybody knew it. It's a small town. So when she just died in her sleep one day, everyone took it as the inevitable and moved on. The family was devastated, especially the cousins. We had lost our best friend. We had lost our cool aunt. Of course, the man she married, the man I won't call my uncle, barely attended the funeral service, was not a part of any family gathering, was not a part of any family mourning. He was just off on his own, and he became a ghost. Everyone took it as he just didn't want to participate, like he never participated. And everyone left it at that. About a week after my Aunt Connie's death, the entire family was still reeling and feeling the effects of the shock. My grandmother came to me in a dream, and she only said 3 words: "She can't breathe." She can't breathe. I woke up in a full sweat, startled, scared. I was a 13-year-old kid. I didn't say anything to my parents at first, but as time went on, my grandmother kept appearing in my dreams, saying those same 3 words: "She can't breathe." Eventually, after about a week of me losing sleep, it got to the point that I didn't want to sleep anymore. It was scary. I didn't want to see my grandmother in my dreams. I didn't know what she meant, and it was scary. Eventually, I told my mother, and my mother started crying immediately, and she admitted to me that she had been having the same dream.
Grandma's message to Jerry and his mother, more than cryptic, seems to be a reaffirmation of the way their Aunt Connie died. But for some reason, it leaves them with a feeling that something is not right, and they decide to do something about it.
We decided to talk to one of my uncles, my Uncle Bob. My Uncle Bob worked at the city jail. He was a corrections officer at the city jail. And he had a best friend who was also named Bob, who had grown up as almost a 10th member of the family. My Uncle Bob and his best friend Bob had grown up together since they were 6 years old. They were best friends. And Bob, the one not my uncle, was always at my grandmother's house when he was a kid. He would eat dinner there. He would spend weekends there. He was always spending the night. He was like a part of the family. Well, as a grown-up, Bob, not my uncle, had become a police detective. So my Uncle Bob reaches out to his best friend, the detective, and tells him what had been happening with me and my mother and the dreams with my grandmother. He asked his best friend, the detective, if he had ever interviewed my Aunt Connie's husband after her death. The detective said no. There was no suspicion of anything. Everyone knew that she was sick. Everyone said that this would eventually happen, so everyone just wrote it off. So my Uncle Bob tells the detective, "Do me a favor, talk to him." The detective reaches out to my Aunt Connie's husband, not my uncle, and interviews him for 6 hours. At the end of those 6 hours, my Aunt Connie's husband, the man I will never call my uncle, admitted that after a big fight, after 6 hours, after being interviewed for 6 hours, my Aunt Connie's husband, the man I will not call my uncle, admitted that after coming home drunk and having a big fight with my Aunt Connie, he waited for her to go to sleep and he smothered her with a pillow until she was dead. My Aunt Connie's husband went to jail and the family was rocked by the scandal, but we were happy that the truth had come out and that justice had been served for my Aunt Connie, who was so beloved and so very much missed. I don't know if second sight is true. I don't know if having ESP or being able to tell the future is something that actually does happen. But I'll tell you what, I am a skeptic no more.
It is not uncommon for people who have lost loved ones to receive messages from them after their death, often related to some unresolved matter. Jerry's case is unique in that his grandmother communicates with him and his family through dreams in order to seek justice for Aunt Connie. This serves as a prime example of how paranormal events can transcend dimensions and intersect with our own. What do you think?